Welcome, everyone. This session is titled Learning from Our Students, Qualitative Analysis of Feedback Forms. And the presenters are Linda Hacker, an associate librarian at SUNY Brockport, where she focuses on instruction. Jennifer Kegler is also an associate librarian at SUNY Brockport, where she focuses on instruction. And Logan Rath is a PhD student at the University of Buffalo, and also an associate librarian at SUNY Brockport, where he focuses on instruction. Just a few quick reminders. If you could use the Q&A to submit your questions, I will periodically check in on the Q&A to monitor and read those questions aloud. And just as another general reminder, this session is being recorded and will be shared with all participants when the presenters make it available.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to, as soon as I find where I hit the Zoom thing, turn off my video for the session so that you can focus on the slides. And I think you're up first, Linda.
Yep, let me turn on. Okay. So the problem is, began last summer, 2019. We got a new director for the library, who some of you have met, Diane Ferguson. Diane came from R1 schools where the assessment was the norm. She asked if we did assessment, and to be honest, we didn't have a culture of assessment at the library. I'm sure many of you do. We all have done informal assessment, usually verbally, but nothing to report. So this brought up a lot of issues and trepidations for Jennifer, Logan, and me. First of all, our instruction team is just Jennifer, Logan, and me. And then we have a couple of people who do 1 or 2 courses. Our library's history is one of starting a project such as strategic planning and then no follow-through. We didn't want to once again go through something and start a project that wouldn't come to completion. Our library's history also has a gotcha mentality. And we were afraid that the results, even though we are very good instructors, would be used against us. We've had this happen with things as simple as results from personality tests. Thirdly, we've gone through many projects that began as pilots, and then without any assessment of the pilot, became an actual requirement. So we expressed all of this to Diane, and she was actually very understanding. It took her some time, even after we started the assessment process, to assure us and for us to understand that assurance that the results would not be used against us. She said she thought it would be useful for us to see if we were all on the same page as far as information literacy instruction. And also, once we had the results, we would use the results for something meaningful to us. And as you'll see, and yes, this process turned out to be extremely meaningful professionally and personally for us.
Okay.
So this was our assessment. We started out with, if you're familiar with assessment, this is kind of the 3-2-1 method with a little Likert scale at the bottom. We did make an online form, but we also used paper forms, and you can see there the questions we asked. And then most of us ended up using paper because, as you might know, it's sometimes easier to put the paper right there in front of them. They fill it out and we collected it at the end of class. So we did end up with a lot of paper forms, but we thought that might make it easier to make sure that they actually answered the questions, whereas when they did the online forms, sometimes they would forget or they would log out before they even got to the form. So forward the slide. So in closing the loop, this is taking the questions and then what did we actually do with this information? List the 3 things you learned today. That's the qualitative analysis that we're focusing on today for this presentation. How do you see using these how do you see yourself using these in this class or another class? We kind of double check to see, did they learn something they might be able to use elsewhere? Hopefully they did. is there anything else you would like to learn? We took that question and followed up with the instructor if there was something that a gap we missed or something we thought the instructor should know about. And then the Likert scale, we kind of used as a confirmation for our own instruction, and it was almost that feel-good moment. We did have, a lot of my classes had 4s and 5s circled. Occasionally there would be the lower numbers, but for the most part, it sounded like after just, most of these were just one-shot sessions, that this was something that they could use hopefully in the assignment for the class. Next slide.
Okay.
So
as I was introduced, I'm undergoing a PhD program, and qualitative research is the methodology that I've chosen. And so because we had this open-ended question, we really wanted to dig deep and sort of unpack the question and do something more specific, deep dive into it. And I noticed that there's a typo in this slide, so that'll be fixed for the final presentation. It should be entirely reduced to numerical values. The words and what students wrote, you couldn't just quantify it because they use different terms and they said things in different ways. So by using a qualitative methodology, we could really dive deep and understand what our students have actually learned. We used Practical Research, Planning and Design by Leedy and Amrad, at the 12th edition, to drive our work. And so we use specifically pages 351 to 353 that talk about qualitative data analysis, and there are screenshots of the Creswell analysis spiral here and 2 of the 3 steps of coding. We met as a group to talk through the process. I shared what I knew with my colleagues. They chimed in. We came up with a process that would work for us. And that ended up being a 3-step qualitative coding process. Our official design was an evaluation design. And this makes us exempt from IRB because we weren't trying to understand student behaviors. We weren't trying to do anything with human participants. We just wanted to evaluate if our sessions were working and evaluate if the form worked. And so that was our official design. And then our coding method ends up being phenomenological coding. It's a really long word and fun to spell. And so this coding style has 3 parts, and the next slide I'll talk about that. But this gets at understanding a phenomenon. And the phenomenon was being in a library instruction session. It was a phenomenon that was experienced by a certain group of people. It's close to a case study, but it wasn't we chose not to embrace the case study methodology because we didn't have multiple forms of data. For coding methods, we used Saldana's book, and I helped my colleagues with this part. And there are 3 steps to qualitative coding. The first step is initial or open coding. So what we did is we went through our forms, either print or digital, and assigned a code to each of the responses. We coded the response as a whole item, each line. So we had up to 3 responses in each of our forms. And then once we had that big list of open codes, we focused them. We met and we talked through some sort of themes that sort of emerged, and we came up with this smaller group of focused codes. We also grouped those focus codes into themes, and we ended up with 4 themes, which we'll be sharing with you soon.
Oops. Is this me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. So what we did is we made half-page forms that the students manually filled out. We had also created an online form with the same questions to have them review them or fill them out at the end of each session, but found that the students weren't filling out the online forms, so we continued with the paper forms. And we ended up with 1,576 half-page forms. Let me do a little bragging here. And yes, for this presentation, every single form was reviewed. Also keep in mind, as I said before, 90% of the instruction was done by just 3 librarians, Jennifer, Logan, and I. In topics as diverse as art history, English, education, public health, social work, general education programs, journalism, broadcasting and public relations, history, women and gender studies, sports management, physical education, kinesiology.
So this is the first theme, how to use the library. And I thought of this before we go much further, and my colleagues haven't heard this, but we did not do this assessment with any of our first year experience, the introduction to the library group. That is assessed in a different manner. So some of these numbers may have been higher if we were talking about freshmen being introduced to the basic library and all the services there. Although the numbers are still similar, I just wanted you to know that this doesn't really include any of the freshmen. We do at least 50 courses for them. So most of these, I mean, this still included freshman classes like English 112, English 101, that type of thing. So the first theme, how to use the library, centered around the idea of the physical and virtual library. The theme included ideas of access to collections, getting help, using the website, accessing LibGuides. Our codes ended up including Blackboard, LibGuides, using library website, using databases, getting help, which kind of got folded into Ask a Librarian, and contact information, library information, holds, interlibrary loan, and course reserves. So next slide. These are the numbers that were represented in a lot of this was the first question. What 3 things did you learn? You can see interlibrary loan was very high on the list, as was Ask a Librarian, which is how to get help from a librarian, either email, there's a web page, you can do online chat, that type of thing. The Blackboard link, which linked them to the LibGuide specific for their course, and of course the library website. Advanced side. So these were some of the things that they learned. These are some of the free comments that we thought were kind of fun to share with you. Articles can be free. Our library is crazy nice. And oh, the library has a first floor, which some don't realize because they come in on the second floor.
The second theme that we came up with was the idea of the search process. And so this theme encompasses all of the skills and ways of searching. So we ended up with 2 sub-themes here, and this is the only theme that ended up with sub-themes. And so we had our how and our where. And then I have a list of the major codes here, the open codes that we chose. This slide, I forgot to mention, is called a memo or an analytic memo. And it's part of what you do when you're starting the theming process. And we did this over a Zoom call where we started to talk about what our themes would be. And the memos are useful so that you can go back and remember why you came up with that topic. So our codes for the search process, under how we had keywords, filtering, and then search plus. We added the plus because when students talked about searching, it usually had a directional indicator of improving or getting better at searching. That there was something about what they learned that was useful and made them a better searcher. For where, this is where we had two major codes under, which were locating specific sources. And so this was used anytime a student mentioned a specific database name that we had in the class, Primo, anything like that. Or if it was an assignment specific resource. So I worked with a teacher education course that needed access to a specific title that was online as an ebook. And so that became a specific resource that they knew how to find. And these may be things that were linked from a LibGuide like that. Google Scholar also had a fair number of hits. So we learned that we are teaching Google Scholar and that students are learning from that. Some of the quotes that came up are how to dive deep into research. The library website is easy to use. How to do research without Google. And then I really liked this one. You should take 2 minutes to do research. I thought that was just a really nice phrase that someone wrote down. And then Primo was more useful than I thought. This quote resonated with me because when we first got Primo, it was different and I thought it was going to be a lot less useful than it ended up being.
This next section is on evaluation. And the evaluation process that students use for library resources as well as websites. And this year we added some additional items for students to consider during their evaluation process. Alternative facts, fake news, fact checking, which I'm sure all of you included in your instruction. And codes for this included peer review, scholarly, non-scholarly, the trap method, and primary, secondary, evaluating websites, and credible and reliable resources.
Sorry, I advanced the slide on you.
Oh, it's okay. And then we're to the next one? Okay.
Yep.
So peer review, the students need to know, is this an article in a journal or is it a magazine? You know, they want to actually see, is this good or bad? Has it been adjudicated by a panel of experts? Primary, secondary. The students need to know, is this the original code? Scholarly, non-scholarly. Articles or books may be written by a professional, a journalist, for example, or is there an expert in the field involved? Are there references published for profit? That kind of thing that we're looking for. And then also the trap method, which some of you may have a different method that you're using, but this is an abbreviation for timeliness, relevance, authority, and purpose. We use that a lot for evaluating websites, but you can also use it for other types of evaluation. And comments that we got for this were, notice that some things might be false. Using trap to find the relevancy of the source. Why it's important to have good sites. How to figure out if a website is credible or not. How to recognize bias. And so what these ended up doing for us is they affirmed for us that the students understand that not everything that is written or online has the same level of authority. Okay.
And this was our fourth and final theme, mechanics. This theme encompasses all the things students must do with the information they find. So in our cases, this encompassed writing, citing, using Word, saving articles, using databases and features, and use of technological tools. This is an area we don't typically spend a lot of time on during our courses. However, as you'll see in the results, it came up as this was very important. So next slide. There you can see citation and formatting. We had 795 mention it. And this included, we all teach for different courses on campus. So this could include things like APA or MLA, or in my case, there's a format called MESSI, which they use in exercise science, very specific. I just mentioned it briefly, but I think it's because the first time they've heard it, they may remember that. Also, computing and keyboard shortcuts. We have a really nice handout for that, which makes things go more smoothly. Database tools, PDF versus HTML. Some of them are still learning what that means. And printing or sometimes emailing to themselves came up as well. So here's a couple of quotes. I've been doing APA wrong my whole life. And then we thought this one was fun. How to properly write an APA citation without using a machine. And we know in high schools, a lot of times they use a citation machine, or they have, I forget the name of the database, but there's something that helps them put it in the format. We actually show them how to do it. Next slide.
Okay. So for the discussion, we learned a lot from doing this analysis. What's not on the slide is we learned exactly how long it takes to do qualitative analysis. And I am staring at the pile of about 1,000 papers that I agreed to code. And it took time. It definitely took a lot of time, and it's a very intensive process. But we did learn that we're doing well. Students are learning what we're teaching, and that's very affirming. And it was great to read the comments. At the bottom, we also had an area for just general comments, and those were amazing. So much so that I even kept a couple of them aside for those like really bad days when you want to remember the good days. I have those quotes to look at. We did learn, and I mentioned this earlier, that they do see us as helping them get better at things, and better was a word that they used often, so we put it in quotes here. Specific to mechanics, this is one that we as librarians spent some time talking about. We came up with the idea that mechanics hits so hard because it's like that last 10%. It seems to be the difference between an A and a B. That if they really master APA, that's going to make their grade better. We also noticed that the ability to properly use APA seemed to have almost a disproportionate number of points on the assignment compared to the content. So many students seemed like the mechanics piece was completely new to them. I know when I would teach and I would show them something as simple as like the case changer in Word, where they can pull a citation out of EBSCO and then fix the article title to look like a sentence with just a couple clicks, the jaws would drop. And it would be like students are quiet the whole time, and then I show them that, and then all of a sudden 3 people are speaking up and saying, go back, say that again. And it was really simple tips and tricks, but we thought it was important to do that. Other things that we learned was that we need to partner with our writing center. If mechanics has such a large quantity of what they're learning, we need to be on the same page with the writing center. And we have a good relationship with them, but this just affirms and gives us some data behind why we would approach them for a meeting. Limitations. Every study, quote unquote, has limitations, and we only know what they said they learned. We have to situate what we did in its context. We only know what they wrote down. It is a snapshot in time. We don't get to see if they actually did use those skills or remembered them a week later, a month later, when their assignment is due. Another thing we didn't do was triple code the entire set. While we did reach intercoder agreement through discussion and that initial meeting we had, we didn't pass off our forms and code 1,500 forms 3 times. We also didn't directly compare the forms with lesson objectives. We did that off the top of our heads. I know I would look at a form, and I believe my colleagues as well. We all looked at our forms after the class to see how it compared, but we didn't do, as part of our coding, we didn't check for any agreement between lesson plan objectives and forms. And not every class got evaluated. We taught more than the number of classes we evaluated. Sometimes it was as simple as you had multiple classes in a day and you forgot to grab the assessment forms. And then we also can't guarantee that we surveyed 100% of the students and that they all completed it. So we know that those who were willing to complete the assessment did, but we're not quite sure that every student did. There were no names on them. There was no personally identifying information for us to check.
Oh, this is my slide. So our next steps, we are looking at using Project Outcome in the fall. This is a service through ACRL. At our campus, we've been encouraged to use less and less paper due to the COVID outbreak and not wanting to touch too many papers or that whole high touch service. We also don't know exactly for sure yet whether or not we're going to be in person or online or some sort of hybrid model. And we know that if we do have times when professors are just teaching a few students and they're coming in every other day, we may lose some of our classes that we normally did in person. So we want to have something where we can actually measure or assess the classes, but do it using an online form. The one that we created would work, but we have been looking at Project Outcome and they will actually help you collate the results, whereas our other one we had to collate ourselves. And some of the forms that I ended up using were ones that came from the online form, but again, it had to be all manually done. So this is something we're excited about. We're actually going to try it. Logan's going to try it with a couple of classes possibly this summer, and we'll look into using that for the fall semester.
So, thank you. Now it's time for our Q&As.
Okay, great. The first question came in from Melissa, and the question says, was that many forms in a single semester? So maybe if you could talk a little bit about maybe was it a lot that did you feel like that was enough that forms that you received? Did you think it was a large number?
I can say for myself, at the time, it seemed like it was an okay number, and I felt like I had evaluated enough classes. And then when I had them at home and I'm going through them at like 1 in the morning, it started to feel like I have too many forms. Mm-hmm. I do believe we reached what's called theoretical saturation. By the time I got to the last probably 25% of classes, I wasn't seeing anything new pop up. And so that's called theoretical saturation, where it just sort of confirmed that at least among the data set that I had there, I very likely had covered all the bases.
And these, I'll just pipe in, these, we collected the forms first and second semester. So it did include, we do teach more in the fall, but it included spring right up until we were sent home, which a lot of our instruction was done before March 11th when everyone got sent home.
Okay, Melissa has actually added something to the chat. I'll read it aloud. I just meant it literally was 1,500 plus in a single semester to assess. Seems like a lot. Project Outcome is great and is very easy to get results, but it might not give you everything you get out of your homegrown survey. I have used it along with a very similar survey to yours. Okay.
Yeah, it was 2 semesters. It was 2 semesters. But our campus size, we're a mid-sized campus, and we have about 7,200 full-time equivalents, and it results to about 9,000 humans on campus. So
right, and as we were doing this, I mean, we're teaching classes that are size 20, 25 students. So when you're collecting 20, 25 forms, it really doesn't seem that much. Mm-hmm. Not until you actually started reviewing the information did it seem overwhelming.
And we were directed to do this by our new director. So we were trying to work with her and figure out, is this model going to work? Is this going to be too much, too little? So it's something we'll definitely reassess too. But that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, next question. If
Sure.
your classes will be online in the fall, will you use the same assessment forms just online?
That's something to be discussed. Considering how few students filled it out, we certainly need to discuss that to figure out how we move forward. And so this summer, we're actually going to be spending some time thinking about what our instruction is this fall, and how we implement Project Outcome. So it'll definitely be a major conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if we would need to do a large qualitative analysis every year. We've done the evaluation, and if we're going to switch to this new form, it might not make sense to add too many qualitative questions.
But I don't know, I still don't know if we'll do how we'll do the online to get them to fill it out. I just don't know.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
next question is, how did you decide on questions for the assessment?
That actually happened in my office when Diane came in and she said, I think it's a good idea for assessment. And I said, well, what would the questions be? And those were the questions. It was as easy as that.
Yeah, and she had used those questions at her previous institution, I believe.
Yeah.
And so she had already done a project somewhat like this. So we had an idea that she had useful data from her questions before.
The next question is, what is the TRAP method? Is it similar to the SIFT method?
I don't know what the SIFT method is. It's the TRAP method is for evaluating websites, and it's actually an acronym for timeliness, relevance, authority, and purpose.
Yeah, it's just a slightly different version of the CRAP test, anything like that. So I imagine it is similar to the SIFT test. I have not heard of the SIFT test before, so I'm excited to have a new tool.
I've also heard of the cards. One of the instructors uses the cards method. It's the same thing too.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay, the next question is from Dana Longley. And do you do any assessment of faculty views of the instruction session alongside the student assessments?
We did in the past, years ago. This particular year we did not, but it's something that we've talked about adding, especially to, see how the students' work actually came out. We did one year assess the English 112, which is our equivalent of English 101. We assessed their bibliographies at the end of the semester to see if the instruction made any difference, and that was very time consuming. It was very interesting, but then the results were never were published, or we had a director who wasn't interested in assessment. So we didn't keep doing that project either.
Yeah. And Dana actually followed up to expand on that question, and I think you answered the expanded question, which was, for example, an end-of-term assessment of faculty to see if they noticed any impact on student work quality. So.
Well, I can say that I do follow-ups like very not informally with faculty, where faculty will email, I think, all of us, telling us that the assignment was great or the session was great and their students learned a lot. But it would definitely be an interesting thing to do, would be to have faculty look at rate our assessments.
I had a faculty member actually talk to me this semester and said that the results that the students were turning in for their references was so much better than previous semesters. But once again, that's an informal review.
The next question is, have you or plan to leverage this data to promote and increase faculty use of instruction sessions?
We haven't talked about it yet, but I think we will, definitely.
Mm-hmm. We went from 5 instruction librarians down to 3 this year, with the same number of classes that we've historically taught. We are adding an instruction librarian now. We have, even during this financial period, we've been given permission to hire another one. So that certainly will, that's a great idea, and it certainly will come into play.
The next question is, how will your assessment change in the move to project outcome?
That one, we don't really know yet. We haven't dug into project outcome too much, so we probably will not ask the exact same questions, but we will look at that and decide what we need to know, what outcomes we need to know, and then go from there.
The next question is, did you have any student responses that didn't give you anything useful, for example, such as all good or nothing at this time? Also, did you think about mapping your codes/themes to the framework?
We had, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I had one person who wrote nothing for one of the questions. So out of, I think it was 1,018 forms, I had one who said nothing.
I have many students who said, I had this before. And I think it was because they've been in other classes before. Some students mentioned they had it before at other schools. Some people said they didn't learn anything new.
And what was the second part of that question again?
It was about mapping your, let's see, yes, did you think about mapping your codes/themes to the framework?
No. That's a great idea.
It is a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we decide to write this up for publication, that would be a great suggestion. So thank you for saving us from the feedback of reviewer number 2.
Do you think it's important to do assessment every semester for every year?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would think you'd want to do assessment, especially for new things that you're teaching, with new instructors, so that you can see that you're still on the right page and doing the right thing. I would like to think that consistency could be evaluated if you did it a couple of consecutive semesters or consecutive years, but I don't know if you have to continue to do it all the time.
I can answer from a gen ed perspective. Our general education assessment committee, they have a schedule, so they do not assess certain classes every semester. We're supposed to be assessing the information literacy part of the SUNY gen eds. I don't even know where that stands, but it was supposed to be done this fall, and then it would be done like every other fall. So it really depends on what you're measuring. And for the gen ed assessment, part of the reason they need that data is for the middle states, our middle states accreditation. And I know they came up with that because they just can't possibly assess every single class, every single semester. It ends up with too much data. So it really depends on what you want to know and what the purpose is.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think it's always good to get some form of feedback.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to put it again into context. So a big assessment project like this, I don't think we have the bandwidth to do this every year or every semester. Yeah. But a quick little check with your students where have them hold up a thumbs up if they learned something new that's useful to them, that's good to know.
Okay, the next question is, can you go over how you were able to bypass the whole IRB thing again?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So this falls under what's called an evaluation project, where we are evaluating a program. We are not doing what the federal definition of research is, and it's sometimes referred to as capital R research, which is like a systematic evaluation of behaviors or patterns, things like that. We weren't looking at people. We were looking at this was closer to a content analysis, which there's no people, and we didn't collect any personal information. Had we had students write down their student ID number or their names, then we would have probably had to go through an entire IRB process. But I looked at the flowcharts of what counts as research, and I sat on our college's IRB before. And so I looked at it and determined that this really wasn't, this wasn't anything knew we weren't putting any student in any sort of harm anyway. We weren't asking them to do anything out of the normal. And obtaining consent may have actually skewed our response. But once it's labeled as an evaluation instead of a research investigation, it is not subject to IRB oversight.
Okay, the next question is, do you think there is a way to do this qualitative assessment coding with a single librarian and have it be reliable without having any intercoder agreement? I tried to do something like this on my own and fumbled through it, but I have no idea if it has any validity.
Yeah, so I will take that one again. There is no such thing as reliability and validity in qualitative research. What you're looking for is more credibility and confirmability. And this was something that when I took my first qualitative course, it shocked me. And I have a chart somewhere that I will find after I'm answering this question and paste it into the chat. But if you Google qualitative reliability, you'll come on this webpage that looks like it was made in 1994. And it has a nice little chart that shows you what the words you should be using are. And so with qualitative research, if you've coded this and you're writing it up, as long as you clearly explain how you came to that realization and include evidence from your data that supports it, that's how you achieve those things. So you definitely can do this as a one-person thing. You could also work with a student worker or a research assistant or another professor to help you code the data if you wanted to. If your professors have a publication requirement for tenure and you wanted to publish on it, that might be a really great partner thing to give them a second author spot. But I hope that answers your question.
The next question is, were there time management issues when administering the assessment?
There definitely were for me. I tended to run out of time, or I would forget. I would go to the end and I'd be helping them, and all of a sudden the class was over and I forgot to hand them the form. That just depended on sometimes how much interaction there was, whether or not the class, if the professor got involved. Sometimes they wanted to teach a little bit at the end. So it would be awkward leaving the form and then leaving the class. But obviously not everyone had that issue because we did have a ton of responses.
I always left a little tiny bit of room because it usually takes maybe a minute to fill out the form. So I left a little tiny bit at the end. But what was so fun is that the students, even if I left, would turn in the forms at the reference desk. Also, if a class was a 3-hour long class and I was only going in there for an hour, I could leave the forms in there and ask the faculty member to return them to the reference desk, and they agreed to that.
Yeah, I would say that was all true for me too. I had to consciously remember that I had them. And so I would put them front and center on the table at the front of our instruction room so that I knew I had to do it. But I think for some classes, I actually wrote on the piece of paper with what I was going to teach, the time that I had to give out the evaluation. And I wanted to try to evaluate as many classes as possible. So that was important to me. I think I would have learned the same amount of things if I didn't survey every class.
And we've got the very last question. It's from Norm. And the question is, when you move to project outcome, have you considered adding some local questions to get an idea if they learned anything? The outcome questions are all asking for student opinions.
We haven't discussed much about project outcome yet. I looked at the slide deck from a recent webinar that was offered. I know, Jennifer, you went to the webinar, but we sort of paused everything preparing this presentation. And so next week we get to dig into all of that.
Right.
Right.
And I think we may look into that. It's so hard with this fall, not really knowing what's going to happen, that we don't want to overload students either. So we may have to decide just on 1 or 2 questions, make it really simple. I'm not positive, and Diane will have some input into that as well.
Okay.
And Norm has added, I think, a comment to the Q&A, and it says project outcomes can be administered online.
Right. That's one of the reasons we're strongly considering it, especially for this fall.
Right.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, it's also the concern.
Right. Getting the responses is the concern. Mm-hmm.
Yes. As we end, I really would like to thank Logan for all the work he did on this, instructing us as how to turn this qualitative information into something more quantitative. And he did more than half of the classes that the responses are for.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I enjoyed it. I mean, it was a lot of work, but I really, it's really fun. I know it's very geeky, but it was great to have real world experience of using this much data. And I had done like brief interviews and brief observation projects before, but now I actually have a really good handle on what it's like to code a giant data set.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I need to thank both of you for following me along on this crazy ride when I said, hey, do you want to present to SUNYLA on this assessment form that we needed to use?
Figure it out together. Oh boy.
Yeah.
It was fun. It definitely helped us work together as a team. So it was nice to have a team project too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was great having it working as a team. We hadn't worked as a team before, which seems kind of funny, but it's true. And it was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of work, but it was so affirmative.
Mm-hmm. But we thank you for your questions. They were helpful and actually spawned some new ideas too. So that's always the fun of doing a presentation. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. That was fantastic. There is no session going on here in track 5 for the 4 o'clock SUNYLA conference session, so you'll have to go find something to participate in tracks 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Right.
But the social after this is the social at 5 o'clock is going to be on this track, but I'm going to close it out till then, so you won't want to stick around until then. But I'm sure everybody will find something wonderful to learn at 4 o'clock, and thanks for participating in SUNYLA.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.